My fiancé offered me $2 million to get rid of our baby. 6 months later, I played the recording of him saying it in front of his entire board of directors. The conference table stretched 12 feet from end to end, and I stood at the head of it with a belly so big the blazer wouldn't button. Diane's blazer. She'd lent it to me that morning without a word, just held it out like a coat check attendant, and I'd taken it the same way. It hung loose at the shoulders. I didn't care. Blue bottle coffee steamed from the machine in the corner. The same machine I'd picked out 2 years ago when Matt said the office needed an amenity that signals we're not a garage anymore. The LED panels overhead threw clean white light across the glass tabletop, and on the screen behind me, projected 6 feet wide, sat a wireframe I'd drawn at 2 in the morning in a garage in East Austin. The User Authentication Flow, version 0.3, still in production, still the backbone of every interaction Vantage had ever processed. Matt sat on the far side, second chair from the end. I'd never seen him sit anywhere besides the head of this table. Julian Park had taken that seat today. Julian's face gave away nothing. 3 board members flanked him, and they all had the same expression, the one investors get when they suspect their money has been doing things they didn't approve of. I clicked the remote. Slide 7, I said. February 3rd, 2023, 2:14 a.m. This is the user authentication flow that Vantage still uses in production today. My email to Matt, timestamped. His reply 12 minutes later. I read it aloud. This is exactly what I was trying to say. Except he wasn't trying to say it was he I designed it. On my personal laptop, from my personal Gmail. 8 months before I signed an employee agreement, Matt leaned forward. This is a misrepresentation of... Julian raised one hand without looking at him. Let her finish. So I finished. Slide after slide. Emails with timestamps. Figma version histories with my account listed as creator. Voice memos where you could hear me walking through user flows at 3 a.m. while Matt asked questions in the background. And I mean questions, not directions. Metadata showing creation dates that predated every agreement, every contract, every corporate document. Matt's lawyer had been waving around for weeks. Somewhere around slide 19, the baby kicked. Hard right under my ribs, the kind of kick that makes you grab the nearest surface. I put my hand on the table and kept going. My other hand found my belly, and for half a second the boardroom disappeared, and it was just me and this kid, this stubborn, restless kid who'd been with me through all of it, through the motel on I-35 and the calls to attorneys, and the nights when $847 was the entire distance between us and nothing. I had 28 slides left, including the one that would break him. The term sheet his own mother had brought. And after that, the recording, 6 minutes and 42 seconds of Matt's voice, saying exactly what he'd said to me in our kitchen on the night of September 14th. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 6 months earlier, I was still the woman who said right at the end of every sentence and meant, please tell me I matter. The apartment was on South Lamar, a 2-bedroom that Matt signed the lease for before I moved in. His name on the paperwork, his furniture, my throw pillows, which he called your girl stuff in a voice he thought was charming. 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, and he was at an investor dinner, or whatever investor dinners looked like at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in Austin. And I sat on the couch with my laptop open, scrolling through design files I hadn't looked at in months. I hadn't told him yet. The bump was barely there, just enough to make my jeans uncomfortable, and every morning I chose a flannel big enough to hide it because I wanted to find the right moment. The right moment never came. Matt was always on a call, always pitching, always running through decks with the new VP of product, the guy he'd hired to do the job I'd been doing for free. I opened my Gmail and scrolled down to January 2023. There it was. ReMVP V03, the thread that started everything. I'd sent Matt a wireframe at 2 in the morning, the night we ordered pizza from Roppolo's, and sat on the floor of his garage because he didn't have chairs yet. His reply came fast. Babe, you're a genius. We're going to change everything. I read it twice. Then, I opened Slack and read his message from last Wednesday. The board doesn't need to know every design decision. That's a product team function now. The voice memo app was still open from earlier. I'd been looking for a note about a freelance gig, something I'd recorded while walking to HEB, and I'd accidentally played the most recent file instead. Matt on the phone, his voice low, like he was cupping the receiver, talking to someone whose name I didn't catch, cleaning up the cap table before Series D. She's not technically a co-founder. The early work was freelance, so legally, I'd stopped it there. Frowned, scrolled past it to find my grocery list. I should have kept listening. My phone buzzed. Mom. She called every Sunday at 7, but sometimes on weekdays too, when the worry built up in her and she needed to hear my voice to push it back down. Mija, do you have your name on anything at that company? I changed the subject. Asked about the weather in Phoenix, about whether she'd finished the new Stephen King. She let me redirect, then silence 3 seconds of it, the kind that carries more weight than any sentence she could have built. My mother had spent 23 years inside the same invisible architecture I was standing in now, and she could see the beams and load-bearing walls even from 4 states away. Just checking baby, she said. You know, I just like to check. Matt came home early the next night, which should have told me everything. He never came home early. The door opened at 8:45, and he moved through the apartment with the tight efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed what he was about to do. Patagonia vest hung on the dining chair. Topo Chico from the fridge, the cap twisted off in one motion, no offer to get me one. He sat down across the granite island and placed a manila envelope between us, centered, precise, the way he positioned decks before a pitch. His hair was freshly cut, the kind of trim he got before investor meetings, sharp at the temples. He'd been preparing for something tonight. I just didn't know it was this. We need to talk about the baby. My hand went to my stomach before my brain gave the order. A cramp rolled through me, low and deep. I remembered the voice memo app, the one still loaded on my phone from yesterday. The phone sat on the counter next to the stove screen down the app, still in memory. I reached for a dish towel hanging beside it, and in the same motion, I unlocked the screen and tapped record. One gesture. He was watching the envelope, waiting for me to open it. I was going to tell you this weekend, I said. How did you... Your doctor's office called the house. Confirmation of a 12-week appointment. He opened the envelope himself when I didn't move. A cashier's check. I read the number and my brain did that thing where it just refuses to cooperate with what your eyes are telling it. $2 million. More money than I'd make in a decade of freelance work. More money than my mother had earned in her entire career as a nurse. Take it, Matt said. Get it handled. I need to focus on the round. Series D closes in 6 weeks. If this gets out a baby with an employee unmarried Julian, and the board will have questions I can't answer right now. Get it handled, Aaron. Be rational. This is $2 million. You can do whatever you want after. Start your own studio. Travel. Whatever. But right now, the timing is wrong. The timing. Don't make this emotional. This is a business decision. A business decision about our child. It's not a child yet. It's 12 weeks. I looked at the check. Then I looked at him. And I recognized the voice. I'd heard it 100 times through the wall of his home office, through the Zoom calls I could barely make out from the kitchen. The pitch voice, measured warm, the cadence designed to make you feel like you were being let in on something, like he was doing you a favor by sharing his vision. He was pitching me. I was the stakeholder who needed to be aligned, the objection that needed handling, the line item that didn't fit the narrative for Series D. My mother took the silence for 23 years, took the later honey, took the excuses that sounded reasonable at midnight and hollow by morning. I was 12 when I decided I'd never stand where she stood. And there I was, same kitchen island, same speech, same deal. Just more zeros. I picked up the glass of water next to my laptop and threw it in his face. The answer is no. Water dripped from his jaw onto the check. And Matt, I designed that product. Every screen, every flow, every pixel that made Julian write that first check. You remember that when you walk into that boardroom without me, I grabbed my laptop. I grabbed the bag I'd packed that afternoon, the one under the bed, the one my gut had told me to fill while Matt was at the office. I picked up my phone. The recording was still running 6 minutes 42 seconds. My hands were shaking, but I managed to photograph the check, the $2 million sitting there on the granite getting wet before I slid the phone into my pocket. Then I pulled the engagement ring off my finger and set it down next to the envelope. $28,000 of brilliant earth diamond on a wet countertop. Matt didn't move. Water ran down his chin, and he just sat there blinking. He didn't follow me to the door, and the fact that he didn't was the clearest sentence he'd ever spoken. The Motel 6 off I-35 cost $79 a night and smelled like industrial bleach and someone else's cigarettes. I sat on the bed with my laptop open and the comforter pulled over my legs because the AC was broken and stuck on high, and I went through every file. 47 emails in the re-MVP thread, 23 voice memos, my voice talking through user flows at ungodly hours, Figma export files with my account as sole creator on every foundational component, all on my personal machine, all in my personal accounts. The Vantage corporate server had production builds, the versions the engineering team worked from. But the originals, the sketches and iterations, and dead ends and breakthroughs that led to the product, Julian Park bet $800,000 on those lived on this laptop, and they'd never. I've been transferred. I opened a new email, typed Julian Park's address from the Vantage investor page, kept it short. Before you finalize Series D, you should know the product's lead designer and original architect will not be part of the company going forward. I have documentation of my contributions. Happy to discuss. Professional. Clean. The kind of email you send when you've been crying for 3 hours and you need to feel like a person who does things instead of a person things happen to. I saved it to drafts. My finger hovered over send for a long time. Sending it meant burning Vantage to the ground or at least torching the foundation. And the thing about torching a foundation is that it's your foundation too. I built the product. If Vantage collapsed, the best thing I'd ever made collapsed with it. I was standing in front of the building I'd designed, holding a match, knowing the blueprints were inside. I closed the laptop. Diane told me later what happened that morning. Matt walked into the office at 7:15 earlier than anyone had seen him arrive in months. My desk was clean. My laptop, the personal one, gone. He called me 8 times. 12 texts, each one shorter than the last, the punctuation dissolving as panic set in. He opened Slack and found my account deactivated. Opened Figma and found the shared project files intact. The production components still there, but my personal workspace, the one with every prototype and iteration note and experimental branch, wiped clean. Deleted the night before from a phone in a parking lot on South Lamar. He called the CTO into his office. Can you pull up the original wireframes? And the CTO, a guy named Wei, who joined a year after me, said the thing that changed the temperature in the room. Those were Aaron's personal files. We only have the production builds. The Series D meeting was in 4 hours. The demo needed 3 product updates that only I knew the flow for because I'd designed them because Matt had never bothered to document what the woman in the flannel was doing at 2 a.m. in the garage when all of this was still just an idea scribbled on a whiteboard. His phone rang one more time. The caller ID said Mom, and that meant Diane, and that meant I'd already made the first call. Matt. Diane's voice, the way she told it to me weeks later. Aaron called me. What the hell did you do 3 days in the Motel 6 and I was running out of underwear? I'd packed the bag in a panic, grabbed things by texture instead of logic. 2 flannels, a phone charger, my laptop, a toothbrush still in its CVS packaging, the prenatal vitamins I'd been hiding in my nightstand drawer. The room cost $79 a night, which meant I'd burned $237 of my $3,000 before I'd made a single decision about what came next. Diane's house sat at the end of a limestone drive in Westlake Hills, the kind of Austin address where the lots are wide enough that you can't see the neighbors, and the mailboxes have numbers but no names. I'd been there twice before, both times for holiday dinners, where Matt controlled the conversation and I helped clear the table. I rang the bell and stood there in the same flannel I'd been sleeping in, no makeup, hair unwashed, since the night I threw water in her son's face. She opened the door and looked at me the way she might look at a quarterly report that came in under projections. Measured, clinical, concerned in a financial sense. She didn't hug me, didn't say she was sorry. She stepped aside, and I followed her into a kitchen that smelled like Chemex coffee and lemon cleaning spray, past a baby grand piano, where her dead husband's photograph watched from a silver frame into a breakfast nook surrounded by bookshelves that went floor to ceiling, business books, investor manuals, 3 shelves of mystery novels, the only evidence that Diane Kessler had an interior life beyond spreadsheets. She poured me coffee without asking if I wanted any and set the mug down between us. "Sit," she said. "Talk." So, I talked. I started with the garage because that was where it started, and I went all the way through. The wireframes I drew on the whiteboard while Matt talked about market fit. The user flow I redesigned at 2 in the morning because his version didn't work and someone had to fix it. The MVP demo I built while he was on the phone with accelerators. The seed round that came in because Julian Park watched that demo and wrote an $800,000 check. Then the slow fade. The new hires. The VP of product who sat at meetings I used to run. The transition from our company to my company in Matt's vocabulary so gradual I almost missed it, like a tide going out while you're reading a book on the sand. The cap table recording. The envelope. The check. Diane listened the way she must have listened to 1,000 pitches in her career as a CFO. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or curse or put her hand over her mouth. When I finished, she picked up her coffee and took a sip that lasted long enough to be a decision. "Do you have the original files?" "On my laptop." "Do you have any written agreement assigning your work to Vantage before your employee start date?" "We never did one. It was just us in a garage. I was freelancing. We didn't even have an LLC yet." "Then, you own those designs." She said it the way someone reads a balance sheet aloud. Fact, followed by fact, followed by implication. She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the hallway, the old-fashioned kind with a lock, and came back with a document in a clear plastic sleeve. The original term sheet, $500,000, the biggest single check she'd ever written. She laid it on the table and pointed to a line near the bottom. "Investment in Vantage Incorporated, based on demonstrated product market fit, as evidenced by MVP presentation." I stared at my own work described in legal language on a document I'd never seen before. "That MVP," Diane said. "I watched you present it. I watched you walk Julian through every screen. I wrote this check because of what I saw. And what I saw was your work, Aaron." She sat back down and folded her hands. "My son offered you $2 million to abort his child. I raised him. That's on me too. I'll deal with that on my own time." She paused. "But I also invested $500,000 based on your product. And right now my son is threatening my investment by being an idiot. So let me be clear. I'm helping you because you built something worth protecting. This is business." I should have wanted comfort. A hug, an apology on Matt's behalf, a motherly hand on my shoulder. But sitting in Diane's kitchen, listening to a 62-year-old woman calculate the value of my work with the same precision she'd used to calculate the risk of my ex-fiancé's company, I trusted her more than I would have trusted warmth. Warmth could change its mind. Numbers held. "I have an IP attorney," Diane said. "She specializes in founder disputes. She's expecting your call Monday morning." I picked up the coffee. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time in 3 days, the tremor had direction to it, engine vibration instead of system failure. Something was starting. The attorney's office was on Congress Avenue, 14th floor, the kind of downtown Austin address that cost more per square foot than the apartment I'd just left. I went in with my laptop and a flash drive and a legal pad where I'd written every date I could remember, and over the next 6 weeks, I watched my life turn into evidence. The full email archive went back to January 2023, all sent from my personal Gmail to Matt's personal Gmail. Wireframes, interaction designs, user flow diagrams. The timestamps told the whole story I designed, he commented. The earliest messages predated any corporate entity. Vantage Incorporated wasn't even incorporated until April. The employee agreement I eventually signed was dated August, a full 7 months after I started building the product. There was no work-for-hire agreement covering the freelance period. In Texas, that meant the creator retains ownership. The company had an implied license to use the work, sure, but ownership never transferred. I'd been walking around for 3 years with intellectual property worth millions sitting in my Gmail archive, and I hadn't known it because Matt never told me, and I never asked. Because you don't ask the person you love to put your name on the thing you built together. You assume the name is already there. The attorney went through my 23 voice memos, the ones I recorded while pacing around the kitchen at 3 a.m., talking myself through user flows and interaction models. Matt's voice surfaced in a handful of them, asking questions, proposing features that I'd then design and test and iterate on my own. Each recording was tagged with a date and a device ID. My phone, my voice, my ideas. She also pulled the Figma export I'd saved before deleting my workspace, the version history showing my account as sole creator on every foundational component. Her assessment summarized in a 4-page memo I had a strong claim to the foundational IP. I didn't own Vantage, and I probably never would. The company had 3 years of engineering and development built on top of my designs. But the foundation was mine, and they couldn't pretend I'd never laid it. Matt hired his own attorney the same week. The cease and desist arrived on a Tuesday, printed on expensive paper. All work product created during the course of Miss Calloway's relationship with Vantage Incorporated belongs to the company under the doctrine of implied work for hire. My attorney's response was 2 paragraphs. Implied work for hire requires an employer-employee relationship. I was a freelancer. I was never on payroll during the months that mattered. Their argument had the structural integrity of a wireframe drawn on a napkin. I also filed a paternity pre-acknowledgement that month, establishing Matt as the father, opening a path to child support calculated against his income, which between salary and vested equity was substantial enough that the form required a second page. He'd offered me $2 million to make this child disappear. The law was going to make sure he paid for the child's existence, whether he wanted to or not. The bump was showing by then. 4.5 months. I'd moved out of the Motel 6 and into a furnished studio in East Austin. Month-to-month lease, the kind of place with a window unit and a parking lot view. My savings were down to $1,900 and dropping. But the evidence folder on my laptop was getting thicker every week, and for the first time since the night I drove away from South Lamar, the math was working in my favor. 2 months after I left Matt's Series D meeting finally happened. Diane gave me the details. Julian Park had been pushing for dates since October, and Matt kept stalling, citing product updates and platform refinements that required more time. What he really needed was more time to rebuild the demo without me. He'd hired an agency design firm out of San Francisco, burned $200,000 in 8 weeks, and the result looked like a different product entirely. Cleaner in some places, clumsier in others. The interaction patterns I'd spent months testing and refining had been replaced with off-the-shelf templates that functioned but didn't breathe. Julian caught it. "This doesn't feel like Vantage," he told Matt after the demo, according to Diane, who'd heard it from a board member who called her that evening. What happened to the product I invested in? Matt told him the lead designer had left. Personal reasons. He didn't mention the $2 million or the pregnancy or the water dripping from his chin. The same week, my attorney forwarded Matt's latest offer. $350,000 assigned NDA and a full release of any IP claims. Walk away. Take the money. Never say the words I designed it in any public or legal context for the rest of my life. It was a decent offer. My attorney said so in her email, a careful sentence about how litigation was expensive and uncertain, and that this amount combined with future child support would provide meaningful security. She wasn't wrong. $350,000 would pay for an apartment with more than one room. Diapers. Daycare? Health insurance without the COBRA premiums that were eating through what little I had left. The kind of security that sounds abstract until you're pregnant and watching your bank balance count down like a timer. I almost took it. I sat on my futon with the laptop open and the offer letter on the screen and my hand on my belly, and I came within a single click of typing, "I accept." Then I opened the other tab, the email archive, re-MVP V0. AF3. Sent January 19th, 2023. 2:17 a.m. My wireframe. Matt's reply. The first message in the chain that built a $40 million company. I'd built that. At 2 in the morning in a garage with no chairs, eating cold pizza off a paper plate, I'd built the thing that made Julian Park write an $800,000 check. And $350,000 was the price of pretending I hadn't. It was the price of silence. And my mother had taken that deal already 23 years ago, when my father walked out with his business partner and left Rosa Calloway with nothing but a thank you that never came. I closed the offer letter, opened the draft email to Julian that had been sitting in my outbox since the Motel 6. I read it once. Changed will not be part of to is no longer part of. Present tense. Then I hit send before I could change my mind. Matt called 40 minutes later. His voice came through tight and flat, the pitch voice stripped of its warmth, just the structure left. "You're making a mistake, Aaron. I built this company. You pitched this company," I said. "I built it." He hung up. The email was out there now. Julian Park had my name and my claim and my documentation offer sitting in his inbox, and there was no way to unsend it, no way to go back to the motel room and close the laptop and take the $350,000 and learn to live. Inside the quiet, I'd kicked the door open. Whatever came through it next, I'd have to face standing up. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "Julian just called me. He wants a meeting. All three of us." I put the phone down on the futon and looked at the ceiling and breathed. 5 months pregnant. $1,900. 1 IP claim. 1 recording. And a draft folder that was finally empty. The meeting with Julian never happened. Diane called me 2 days after the email, her voice careful, in a way I hadn't heard before. Julian had agreed to meet, yes, but Matt got to him first. Showed up at Red Point Capital's office on West 6th with his startup lawyer and a stack of documentation and the kind of polished narrative he could build in his sleep. By the time Diane reached Julian's assistant to confirm the Thursday sit-down, the calendar had already been cleared. He told Julian, "You're unstable," Diane said. He told him the IP claim is fabricated and the pregnancy is a pressure tactic. I sat on the futon in my studio apartment and pressed my palm against my ribs where the baby had started kicking with the regularity of a metronome. 5.5 months. The window unit hummed. Outside, a truck reversed in the parking lot, its beeping cutting through the wall like a pulse. What did Julian say? Julian said he needs to see both sides before committing to Series D, which means Matt bought himself time. And time is what he's best at using. Over the next 6 weeks, Matt did what Matt always does. He pitched. The legal front came first. His attorney filed a motion claiming my laptop contained Vantage trade secrets beyond my personal contributions and that my retention of the device constituted misappropriation. My attorney called it a fishing expedition, said we'd respond and win, but responding cost money. I was running out of. And every hour she billed was another $40 gone from the stack that separated me from nothing. The motion also demanded I produce the laptop for forensic inspection. I'd have to hand over the machine that held every piece of evidence I had. Then the professional front. Word travels fast in Austin's tech scene. Within 2 weeks of the email, 3 people I'd worked with at meetups and co-working spaces told me in careful language that they'd heard I'd left Vantage on bad terms. A freelance client I'd been talking to about a branding project stopped returning my emails. Another one, a woman who ran a food tech startup out of a WeWork on South Congress, texted me a screenshot of a Slack conversation in a founder channel. Someone had posted, "Heads up, if Erin Calloway reaches out about freelance work, know that she's currently in an IP dispute with her former employer, and there may be confidentiality concerns." The post didn't name Matt. It didn't need to. The personal front was the one that worked best. Matt called my mother. Rosa phoned me on a Wednesday evening, 7 weeks after the email. To Julian, and her voice had that particular texture it gets when she's trying to be neutral about something that confuses her. "Mija, Matt called me today," he sounded. "He sounded worried about you. He said you've been under a lot of stress with the pregnancy and the move, and he wants to help. He asked me if you'd been sleeping, if you'd been eating." She paused. "He said the IP thing is a misunderstanding and he just wants to talk." I closed my eyes. I could hear it the same cadence he used with Julian, with board members with me on the night of the check. Warm, measured every syllable, leaking concern like a slow drip from a faucet he'd calibrated himself. "Mrs. Calloway, I love your daughter. She's having a difficult time. The pregnancy hormones? I just want what's best for her. Mom, he offered me $2 million to abort your grandchild. I know that, baby. I know." But he sounded like a man who pitches for a living. That's what he does. He sells people stories until they buy. Silence on the line. Then Rosa quieter. "Your father sounded like that too, right up until the day he left." I lay on the futon after she hung up and stared at the ceiling fan going around in slow circles. The baby kicked once hard under my left rib. 7 months now. Savings down to $1,200 after this month's rent and the latest legal bill. 2 freelance clients gone. My mother halfway convinced I might be the unreasonable one. Matt was winning. He was winning the way he always won, by controlling the story. And the worst part was that I'd seen him do it 100 times from across the dinner table, and I still hadn't figured out how to stop it. The email from my attorney arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was eating cereal out of the box because the milk had gone bad, and I couldn't justify driving to H-E-B for a $3 carton. Nearly 8 months pregnant. The studio apartment smelled like the lavender candle Diane had brought over 2 weeks ago, the last time I'd seen her, the visit that ended with her saying she'd call soon and then not calling. I read the email on my phone, sitting on the futon, with the laptop closed on the floor beside me, a stack of legal papers on the cushion to my left. I read it once fast, then again slow, then a third time, with my thumb hovering over each sentence like I could press harder and change the words. Julian Park's office had informed my attorney that the Series D was on indefinite hold. The reason given was not my email. The reason was Matt's response to my email. Matt had provided Julian with a signed work-for-hire agreement dated March 15, 2023, bearing my signature, which purported to assign all intellectual property I'd created for Vantage to the company. If the signature was real, this document meant I'd signed away my designs 6 months before my employee agreement. It meant I had nothing. Every email, every timestamp, every Figma export meant nothing against a piece of paper with my name at the bottom. My attorney's note was 3 paragraphs. Professional measured the kind of language lawyers use when the ground is shifting underneath their client. Julian has the original document. Matt's counsel submitted it as an exhibit to their opposition filing. The signature appears consistent with your other signed documents on file. If we cannot prove this document is forged, our position weakens significantly. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I pulled up the attachment. A scanned copy of the agreement, 2 pages boilerplate language about intellectual property assignment and work product ownership. And there at the bottom of page 2, above a printed line that read, "Contractor signature was my name, Erin Calloway." The handwriting was close. Somebody had studied my signature, probably from the employee agreement I signed in August, and reproduced it carefully enough that it would hold up on a scan. Maybe in person too, if nobody looked hard enough, if nobody had a reason to question it. Matt or his lawyer, or both of them together, had fabricated a legal document and submitted it under oath. My phone rang. Diane. Aaron, Matt called me this morning. He says you're lying about the designs. He showed me a copy of the agreement you signed. Diane, I never signed that. That signature is forged. A pause that lasted long enough for me to hear the clock ticking in her kitchen. I knew that clock. It sat above the stove, a brass and glass antique that had belonged to Thomas. I want to believe you, Diane said, but he's my son. And that's my money. I need to think about this. Diane. I'll call you when I'm ready, Aaron. Give me a few days. The line went dead. I put the phone on the futon cushion and sat with my hands in my lap and looked at the attorney's email on the screen. The baby was still. Even she had gone quiet. Allie gone. Evidence questioned. Career dismantled client by client, conversation by conversation. 12 weeks of work, hundreds of hours of building a case, thousands of dollars. I couldn't afford, and Matt had undone all of it with one piece of paper and the signature I never gave him. $847 in my checking account. A studio apartment I could afford for one more month. A baby due in 5 weeks and a bank balance that couldn't buy a crib. I drove to South Lamar that night without knowing why. Parked across the street from the building 3rd floor, the apartment where I'd lived for 3 years. The lights were on. Through the window I could see a shape moving Matt pacing phone against his ear, and at one point he laughed. A big, open laugh, the kind he used at parties, the kind that made rooms feel smaller and warmer. Business as usual. A Tuesday night, and he was on a call, probably with a board member, probably pitching another version of the story where the girl in the flannel was a footnote that didn't quite fit the funding narrative. 3 years I'd lived in that apartment, and there was nothing left of me in it. He'd probably thrown away the throw pillows by now. The mug I drank coffee from was sitting in a cabinet or in a Goodwill bin. The whiteboard where I'd sketched the first user flow, the one that was still running in production, had been wiped clean or replaced. I'd been erased from a place I'd helped build, the same way my mother had been erased from my father's 4th startup, the one that finally made money, the one where nobody remembered the woman who drove the delivery van. I pulled out my phone and called her. 11 at night in Austin, 9 in Phoenix. She picked up on the first ring. She always picked up on the first ring. Mom. He forged a document. He's telling everyone I signed my work away, and I can't prove I didn't. His lawyer submitted it to the investors. Diane won't return my calls. Rosa was quiet for a long time. I could hear the TV in the background, something with a laugh track, and the clink of a spoon against a mug. He told the lawyers, the judge, everyone that I was just the wife who made coffee and answered the phone. 23 years I kept the books. I called the vendors. I loaded the truck when the driver quit, and I drove the route myself for 2 months with you and your brother in the back seat. And when he left with Carla, he told the court I had no involvement in the business, just a housewife who sometimes helped out. What did you do? I did nothing. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the money. And I didn't think anyone would believe me over him because he had the company and the lawyer and the story, and all I had was my word. The laugh track from the TV filled the silence. Mom, I don't have the money either. You have something I didn't have. Her voice changed. The softness went out of it, and what was underneath was hard and bright and older than either of us. You have the files, Aaron. I had nothing. I had 23 years of work and not a single piece of paper to prove it. But you have the emails. You have the timestamps. You have every version of every design sitting on that laptop with a date and a device ID that nobody can forge, because you can fake a signature with a pen and 15 minutes of practice, but you cannot fake the day a file was created. Timestamps. I opened the laptop. The email archive was still there. 47 messages between January and August of 2023. every one of them with a header showing sender-recipient date time. Matt's forged agreement, said March 15th. My first email to him with an attached wireframe was dated January 19th. The second was January 23rd. The fifth was February 11th. And they kept going through March, April, May, June, long after the date on the document that claimed I'd signed everything away. If I signed away my IP in March, why was I still emailing designs from my personal Gmail in July? Why was Matt still replying, "This looks great," to my personal account? Instead of through Vantage's corporate Slack, why would a company that owned my work let me keep sending it from an external address for 5 more months without migrating a single file? The document's metadata. Creation date. If the agreement was signed in March 2023, the file should have been created in March 2023. But if it was fabricated in September or October after I left, the file properties would show a creation date months after the supposed signing. I sat up straighter. The baby moved a slow roll this time, like she was turning over in her sleep. "Mom, I'm here. I need you to fly to Austin. I need someone with me when I go through these files. Someone who can look at the metadata on every document and testify later if it comes to that she saw it with her own eyes. I'll be there tomorrow." "Mom, the flight is." I said, "I'll be there tomorrow. You tell me which airport." I hung up and sat in the car on South Lamar, with the laptop warming my thighs and the light from Matt's apartment falling across the dashboard. I didn't need him to admit what I'd built. I didn't need Julian Park to validate me. I didn't need Diane to choose me over her son. The emails were dated. The files were stamped. The truth was sitting in 47 threads and 23 recordings and a Figma export with my name at the top. And it had been there the whole time, waiting for me to stop asking permission and start reading the evidence I'd already gathered. The forged document was a fake, and I could prove it. The only question left was who I'd prove it to. Rosa landed at Austin Bergstrom at 4 in the afternoon with a carry-on bag and a legal pad she'd bought at the Phoenix airport. She was wearing scrubs. She'd come straight from a 12-hour shift at the hospital driven to Sky Harbor and boarded the first Southwest flight with an open seat. The scrubs still had a pen mark on the chest pocket, and her name badge clipped to the collar R, Callaway RN. I picked her up at arrivals, and we drove to the studio apartment without saying much. She looked at the futon, the window unit, the parking lot view, the stack of legal papers on the floor next to the laptop. She looked at my belly 8.5 months now, the kind of size that makes strangers ask when you're due and wince when you tell them. She set down her bag and sat at the kitchen table, which was a card table from Walmart, and uncapped a pen. "Show me." We worked for 2 days. Rosa had spent 31 years as a nurse, and nurses document everything. Temperature at this time, medication at that time, patient response at this hour. She understood timestamps the way she understood vital signs as facts that couldn't be argued with, only read. I opened every design file on my laptop, and she wrote down the metadata: creation date, modification date, device ID. File by file, row by row, in the handwriting of a woman who'd charted thousands of patient records without a single error. 47 emails, each one screenshotted with its header visible showing my personal Gmail address, sending wireframes and interaction designs to Matt's personal Gmail. 23 voice memos, each tagged with a recording date and my phone's device identifier. Then we pulled up the forged work-for-hire agreement, the scanned copy my attorney had forwarded. We couldn't access the original file's metadata from a scan, but my attorney could. I sent her the full evidence report that evening, Rosa's handwritten log and my screenshots, and a cover note that laid out the timeline. If the agreement was created in March 2023, the digital file should carry a March creation stamp. If it was created in September or October after I left, the stamp would say so. And creation dates on digital documents live in the file properties baked in by the operating system, untouchable without forensic tools that leave their own traces. The attorney's reply came 2 hours later. She'd already subpoenaed the original file from Matt's counsel as part of discovery. The file properties, showed a creation date of September 29th, 2023. 2 weeks after I walked out, 6 months after the date printed on the agreement itself. My attorney's email was 4 sentences. The document is backdated. The creation date postdates your departure by 14 days. This is fraud. We don't need a courtroom anymore. We need the boardroom. Julian Park has to see this before any money changes hands. I called Diane. She picked up on the 6th ring, which meant she'd been deciding whether to answer. I have proof the document Matt showed you was fabricated. The file was created in September after I left. The March date is a lie. I'm asking for 30 minutes. Bring the term sheet. A long silence. I could hear her breathing and the brass clock ticking over the stove. Thursday, Diane said. My house. 10 Diane's kitchen table was clear when I arrived. The bookshelves, the piano, the photograph of Thomas, the Chemex on the counter already brewed. She'd set out 2 mugs and a glass of water, and the term sheet sat in its plastic sleeve at the center of the table waiting. I opened the laptop and laid the evidence side by side. On the left, the forged agreement with its March 15th date. On the right, the file properties showing the true creation date, September 29th. Below that, my email archive showing designs sent from my personal account through July, 5 months after I'd supposedly signed everything away. Diane put on her reading glasses. She went through the emails first slowly, the way she must have reviewed financial statements when she was still working. Then the metadata log in Rosa's handwriting, then the file properties. The creation date on this document is March 15th, she said, but the file itself was made on September 29th. 2 weeks after you left. Yes. She set the papers down. Her hands were shaking a fine tremor that she tried to hide by folding them on the table. I'd never seen Diane Kessler's hands shake before. My son fabricated a legal document. His lawyer may have created it, but Matt instructed it. Or approved it. Either way, Diane stood up and walked to the window that overlooked her garden, the one Thomas had planted before he died, the rose bushes she still trimmed every Sunday morning. She stood with her back to me, and I let her stand there. Whatever was happening inside her was between Diane and Thomas, and the boy they'd raised, and the man he'd become, and I had no role in it. His father was a lot of things, she said to the window. Stubborn, difficult, tight with money. But Thomas would never have done this. He would rather have lost everything than lie under oath. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. Diane Kessler didn't cry in front of people she'd known for less than a year. Maybe she didn't cry at all. But something in her face had settled into a decision that went deeper than tears. I'll call Julian today. He needs to see this before the board meeting on Friday. And Aaron. She pulled the term sheet across the table toward herself, the plastic sleeve catching the light from the kitchen window. I want to be in that room when you present. My investment, my term sheet, my son. Her voice dropped half a register. I need to be there. I picked up my water and drank it. My hand was steady. 8.5 months pregnant, $847 in the bank, and for the first time since September, I could see the end of this. The end was a boardroom and a screen and 47 slides, and every single one of them was true. The conference room smelled like Blue Bottle coffee and new carpet, the same way it had in the flash forward that opened this story, because it was the same room and the same morning. And I was the same woman standing at the head of the table. Except now you know how I got here. You know about the garage and the pizza and the wireframes at 2 a.m. You know about the envelope and the water and the ring on the wet granite. You know about the motel and the futon and the window unit and the bank balance that couldn't buy a crib. You know about Rosa's legal pad and Diane's term sheet and the file that was created in September but dated in March. So let me tell you how it ended. I walked in wearing Diane's blazer, the one she'd handed me that morning in the parking garage, without a word. It still hung loose at the shoulders. My laptop was under my arm and the baby was pressing against my ribs so hard I had to breathe in short pulls. 9 months of her and she was running out of room. Julian Park sat at the head of the table. Diane sat to his right. 3 board members I'd met once at a holiday party 2 years ago, When Matt had introduced me as my girlfriend, she does some design work. They didn't remember me. They'd remember me after today. Matt walked in last. He saw me and stopped in the doorway. Then he saw his mother, and whatever was left of his composure broke into pieces so small you could hear them hit the floor. "What is this?" "Sit down," Matt Julian said. He sat. I clicked the remote, and the first slide came up. The wireframe. Version 0.3. The same one I'd drawn in the garage, the one still running in production, the one that every user who'd ever opened Vantage had interacted with without knowing a 25-year-old woman in a flannel shirt had. Sketched it on a whiteboard at 2 a.m, while her boyfriend ate cold pizza and talked about changing the world. I went through the slides the way I'd rehearsed in the studio apartment the night before, with Rosa timing me on her phone and the baby kicking every time I raised my voice above a whisper. Calm. Professional. Each slide was a timestamp, an email, a design file, a piece of evidence that existed before any agreement, before any corporation, before any investor or board member or Series D round. My work, my dates, my name at the top of every creation record. Slides 1 through 15, the design timeline. Files created on my personal laptop, stored in my personal account, sent from my personal email. Each one predating the employee agreement by months. Slides 16 through 20, the email chain. Matt's replies to my designs, his words on the screen for the whole room to read. This is exactly what I was trying to say. Love the new flow, ship it. You're better at this than me, just run with it. Slides 21 through 25. The forged document, side by side with the file metadata. March 15th on the paper, September 29th in the system. I let the date sit on the screen for 10 seconds without speaking. 10 seconds is a long time in a boardroom, long enough for 3 board members to read the numbers twice and understand what they meant. Matt's lawyer started to say something about a private matter. Julian cut him off without turning his head. This affects a $40 million investment. Continue, Aaron. Slide 26. Diane's term sheet. I read the relevant line aloud. Investment in Vantage Incorporated based on demonstrated product market fit, as evidenced by MVP presentation. I looked at Diane. She looked at Julian. I can confirm, Diane said. Her voice was steady, the kind of steady that costs something. I watched the MVP demo. Erin presented. The product I invested in was her work. Mom! Matt's voice cracked on the single syllable. Everything he'd built, every pitch he'd ever given, every room he'd ever commanded, and it all came apart on a 2-letter word. Don't, Diane said. Matt tried one more thing. The last card. He leaned forward and looked at Julian and said, She's doing this because I wouldn't marry her. This is personal. The old version of me would have argued, would have defended, would have explained that this had nothing to do with the ring on the granite countertop and everything to do with the wireframes in the garage. The old version of me would have said right at the end of every sentence and hoped someone in the room would nod. Play the recording, I said. The audio file loaded on the screen. 6 minutes and 42 seconds. The waveform pulsed once, twice, then Matt's voice filled the boardroom clear as the day he'd sat across the kitchen island and slid an envelope toward the woman carrying his child. Take the $2 million. Get it handled. I need to focus on the round. Silence. The kind that doesn't need a modifier. Julian leaned back in his chair. The board members looked at one another. One of them closed his laptop slowly, the way you close a book you've finished. Matt stared at the waveform on the screen. That's out of context. The context is your child, I said. The context is 12 weeks of a life you tried to buy your way out of. And the product you built your company on, the one you pitched to this room, the one you took to market and raised $80 million around. I designed it in your garage for free because I loved you. You repaid me with an envelope and a forged signature. Julian stood. I'm suspending the Series D pending an independent IP audit and due diligence review of Miss Calloway's claims. Matt, I'm recommending the board retain outside counsel. separate from yours. Matt sat in his chair with his Rolex catching the overhead light, and he looked down at the table the way I'd looked down at the check that night in September. A man staring at a number that was supposed to solve a problem, discovering that the problem was him. Diane stood. She walked over to me and placed her hand on my shoulder. Brief, firm, the hand of a woman who'd just chosen the truth over her only son. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them, and she didn't let go until I nodded. 5 weeks after the boardroom on a Tuesday morning in March, my daughter was born at St. David's Medical Center on East 32nd Street. 6 pounds 11 ounces. She came out screaming, which the nurse said was a good sign, and which I chose to interpret as evidence of character. Rosa was in the delivery room. She held my hand through 14 hours of labor and didn't let go once, not even when I squeezed hard enough to leave marks on her fingers that lasted 2 days. When the baby was out and on my chest, Rosa leaned down and whispered something in Spanish that I'll keep for myself. The apartment I brought her home to was the same studio in East Austin, but different. Diane had sent furniture the week before, just like she'd texted, without asking, without apologizing for her son, without sentimentality. A crib, a changing table, a rocking chair that she said had been Thomas's mother's, but that I suspected she'd bought from Crate and Barrel because the tag was still on the bottom rail. Practical kindness. Diane's only language. I sat in that rocking chair 2 weeks after delivery, the baby sleeping in the bassinet next to my desk, which was an IKEA table with coffee rings and sticky notes, and a whiteboard mounted on the wall behind it. The whiteboard had wireframes on it. A new project. Mine. The first thing I'd designed since September that didn't belong to anyone but me. The settlement had come through 10 days after the boardroom meeting. Julian's independent audit confirmed every claim I'd made. The emails, the timestamps, the metadata, Rosa's handwritten log, all of it held. Matt's lawyers negotiated fast once the fraud evidence was on the table, because a fabricated exhibit submitted to investors wasn't just a civil matter anymore. It was the kind of thing that gets referred to the state bar, and Matt's attorney had more to lose than Matt did. $400,000 and 2% equity in Vantage vesting over 4 years. Full credit as original product architect on the company website and in all investor materials. I didn't need $2 million. I needed what was mine. Paternity was established the week after the birth. Child support set at $4,200 a month, calculated against Matt's salary and equity compensation. He signed without contesting. His lawyer advised him to stop making things worse, and for once in his life, Matt took advice that wasn't his own. He was still CEO. The board kept him on under tighter oversight, a committee structure that hadn't existed before, with an independent seat that Diane had demanded and received. Mother and son hadn't spoken in 2 months. I didn't know if they would. That was between them. The forged document went to the state bar. Matt's attorney, the one who'd created the file on September 29th and backdated it to March, was under investigation. Matt's public position was that it was a miscommunication with counsel. The Austin tech community, which is too small for secrets and too polite for confrontation, simply stopped inviting him to the panels and fireside chats where founders performed their origin stories for admiring audiences. Rosa had flown back to Phoenix the week before. At the airport, she'd held the baby for a long time, longer than the TSA line would tolerate, and then she'd held me. "You did what I couldn't," she said. "Don't carry that as a burden. Carry it as proof." I thought about that while the baby slept and the sun came through the window and lit up the wireframes on the whiteboard. Proof. My mother gave me the word that unlocked everything sitting in a car on South Lamar at 11 o'clock at night, and it was a word she'd carried for 23 years without ever using for herself. Timestamps. Proof. The evidence was always there. She just never had it, and I did. And the difference between her story and mine was 47 emails and a laptop I grabbed on the way out the door. Diane had texted that morning. "How is the baby?" 3 words. The most personal message she'd ever sent me. I texted back a photo. The baby in the crib Thomas's mother supposedly owned asleep, one fist curled around the edge of the blanket. Matt would be a father. He had visitation rights and a child support order, and a daughter who would someday ask why her parents didn't live together. I couldn't control what he told her. I couldn't control whether he learned anything from the boardroom, from the term sheet, from the recording of his own voice offering $2 million to erase her. People decide what they learn. I was done deciding for him. My laptop chimed. An email from a Sequoia Capital address. The subject line read, Julian Park Referral Product Design Lead. I opened it. A woman named Priya Nair, partner at Sequoia, looking for a lead designer on a healthcare fintech project. Julian had recommended me. She quoted his email at the bottom of hers. She's the best product mind I've seen in 10 years, and I almost funded $40 million without knowing her name. I looked at the whiteboard, looked at the bassinet, looked at the wireframes I'd been sketching at 2 a.m. while the baby slept, because apparently that was my hour, the hour when the world got quiet enough for me to think clearly, the same hour I'd been working in since the garage. I typed the reply with one hand. The other hand rested on the bassinet rail, and under my fingers I could feel the faint pulse of my daughter breathing. Tell me more about the project. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it, and I didn't put a question mark at the end, and I didn't ask anyone if it sounded right, and I didn't wait for someone across a kitchen island to tell me whether I was being rational. Aaron Calloway, founder. Outside the window, the Austin sun fell through the whiteboard and cast the wireframes across the opposite wall. The shadows of a new design stretching taller than me, taller than the room, filling the white space with the shape of something that didn't exist yet but would because I'd build the way I built everything. Late at night in a small room, starting from nothing,